Now we get to a really critical part in our curriculum, and that is the rise of fascism, where somehow people have made the decision in Germany, in Italy, and other parts of the globe to devote their lives, their resources, their abilities to help these two men. Now, this guy would probably be familiar to Adolf Hitler, and next to him is the dictator of Italy, Benito Mussolini. Okay? But either way, these two men will set about a route and a path that will affect the world and eventually cause the Second World War. Okay? And so we want to be able to answer the question of how, and how these men were able to not only establish their own authority, but then also start the war as such. Okay? And so we start off, we want to be able to define a term I think people have said, you've probably heard before, a term called fascism. Okay? And the symbol of fascism comes from the Latin word of fasci, or basically a bundle or a sheath, and usually refers to a set of a bundle of sticks that's used and come together as some kind of a weapon. But again, figuratively, it's to mean that if you come together when these, a single stick you can go ahead and break easily, but coming together as a bunch and together, you would create a sense of power and togetherness as well. And so the term fascism can be defined in a number of different ways here. In a lot of ways, now, you can define fascism in a lot of different ways, but really fascism is the creation of a government, just like those bundles of sticks, okay? But a government whereby you create strength at any cost. And some of the characteristics of fascism include probably one of the most important ones is it relies on the charisma of a single individual, a single leader. So whether or not like you find this person engaging, someone does. Okay? And so leaders oftentimes have the ability to get people to do what they want and create this sense of blind loyalty, whereby it seems like these people can do absolutely nothing wrong. Okay. And so that's what we call charisma, not that they're good looking or handsome or so forth. No, it's just they create some sort of magnetism that people are drawn to them, whereby it's so much so that they can almost do no wrong. It's almost like a near godlike status. If you look at our history curriculum so far, Stalin had that particular appeal to his own people. There's also a loyalty, you can almost say blind loyalty to the state, okay, whereby people are devoted almost at all costs. This term what we call ultra-nationalism, that their identity is important and so important that it supersedes almost everything. Fascism tends to be aggressive in that the policies that they lay out means that they want more, they want conquest, and so there's aggression against other states, and any opposition to this particular state, even within the country, oftentimes in the form of a political party, are frequently eliminated. And then as a result of this, democracies have often been formed and eliminated by the fascist regimes once they take power. And when they take power, the opposition isn't just simply other parties, but also individuals as well. Okay? There are no individual rights. They are taken and given based on the whims of the state and of the leader itself. And your devotion isn't to a particular religion, isn't to a group of people, but to the society as a whole, as oftentimes defined by that particular individual charismatic leader, okay, whatever that leader has decided. Okay? There are some hints that capitalism is utilized, but really the corporations, the major big businesses have in a lot of ways been bought out in a number of ways. The corporations oftentimes are co-opted, or they're often there and they conspire with the state. In other words, there are deals that are made between the leader and major corporations, right? Another word for it is what people call crony capitalism. It seems like there's real elections, but really it's the wealthy elite that are making decisions, no matter if there are elections or whatnot. Okay? Corporations often conspiring with the charismatic leader and the political party in power, to, one, get wealthy, but yet also to enhance the power of the state. Okay, so with this, you want to go to your Google document, okay, and answer this question right here. Okay, there have been claims that the United States have succumbed to some characteristics of fascism in recent years. Okay, so out of the ones that we just listed, which fascist characteristic do you believe, okay, we are most vulnerable to, okay, as a group and as a society? Yes, we have a more or less functioning democracy, but which one of the ones that were listed previously, are we most vulnerable to that? We would just simply shed parts of our democracy to follow one of these characteristics. Okay, so go ahead and label that into the box in the Google document. So hit pause on the video right now. All right, hopefully you guys are back at this point and you're able to answer question number 1. Okay. Now, historically, the first place where fascism is implemented was in Italy. Okay, partially because there were a number of internal problems. And some of those internal problems include what happened in the Great War. Now, Italy itself joined the Western allies with France and Britain, hoping that they would get major territorial and land gains from defeating the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians in the First World War. The end result, they got very little, and there were many who were disappointed. There were soldiers who came home from this war maimed, hurt, or at least psychologically hurt, coming back finding that there are no jobs. There weren't any, that inflation had taken place in Italy, and many of them found themselves disgruntled, frustrated, and particularly when young people who tend to be, again, more aggressive, more active, end up unemployed, and with all this time on their hands, they start to join a number of different organizations, including street gangs that were starting to cause trouble, attack particular groups that they don't like. And so you had a lot of these groups now roaming the countrysides and so forth. So there's already issues both in the cities and in the countrysides. And not only that, but everybody is looking east at what is going on in Russia and the Russian Revolution and the rise of communism there. And so this fear of a communist revolution leads many to actually look at those gangs, right, and that were formed during this time period, that maybe these particular groups will deal with the communist problem and the threat that the working class might overthrow the government at hand and create a revolution. So they may accept these guys over the communists. Therefore, it allowed for a strong man, a man by the name of Benito Mussolini, who was a former teacher and newspaper editor, who played on the themes of ultra-nationalism, again, and the fear of the communists. During this era whereby people are saying, look, we want to be independent, we want to be free based on our own national identity. He plays on this, and the promise that he would eliminate communism through the usage of political power and also by violence, particularly using his gangs to repress strikers and workers. And not only that, but when it came time to vote, to also intimidate voters as well. Enough so where by 1922, he felt confident enough to actually take his men and march on the capital city in Rome. A fearful king and a fearful government ended up appointing him prime minister, in other words, giving him real political power, even though he hadn't gained enough electoral seats in the Italian parliament to actually seize power. They gave it to him anyways. And from there, Mussolini starts to dismantle parts of the Italian democratic state. Eliminating political parties, abolishing elections, or at least rigging the elections such that he wins every single time. Once you start to censor the media, in other words, have a single outlet where you control all the information, you can start to influence how people respond to what you are doing. And Mussolini particularly was able to use the new technology of the 1920s, particularly mass newspapers. Again, he's a former newspaper editor. He understood the power of the message. Posters that we're going to look at later on, and particularly radio and film as well. These new moving pictures here, new technologies to whip up public enthusiasm for his regime, and eventually giving himself the title Il Duce, or just simply the leader. Okay. So with that, we move to our second review question, okay, whereby you're going to explain one cause of fascism. In other words, how did fascism rise in Italy? So you want to be able to identify one of the causes and then make an explanation of that particular cause and how it led to the rise of fascism in Italy. So go ahead and pause the video right now and answer the review question number 2. All right, guys, hopefully you've answered number 2 adequately enough. Okay, and we move on to the key country that we're looking at, and that would be Hitler in Germany and the rise of what becomes known as the Nazi Party. It is known as the National Socialist Workers' Party, and it began as not necessarily a left-wing socialist party. Again, a lot of these political parties have democracy and other names in it that aren't necessarily true. If anything, it is definitely a nationalist party. It is a long German title associated with it, and so they're often called the Nazis for short. Okay. Now, this party was a relatively small party in the early 1920s. Okay, and as it turns out, they had a number of key individuals, people like Erich Ludendorff and others, many other famous officials who ended up joining this political party. As it turns out, it was an army corporal who would end up seizing power of the party. Now, Adolf Hitler himself, a failed artist, but also a loyal soldier to Germany at this time, ends up joining the Nazi Party, and turns out he was very skilled in oratory. In other words, he could speak, and he rose up the ranks very quickly in the Nazi Party. And he and others decided in 1923, at the height of the hyperinflation crisis, remember when all those stacks of money were being printed as a result of the Treaty of Versailles and others, during the height of this particular crisis, this group decided to try to seize power in the southern German city of Munich. Okay? It failed. Hitler was almost killed, but as a result, Hitler ends up going to jail. And in jail, he ends up writing a book called Mein Kampf while he was in prison, whereby he lays out the policy of the Nazi Party, the superiority of the German race, what he calls the Aryan race. And that inferior races would be slaves to this master race, or just simply completely eliminated. This belief that the Treaty of Versailles was evil, and that the master race will need to expand. So as the German-speaking peoples of the world starts to grow, he needs to take space from other countries. And this is particularly going to happen, not necessarily in the Western world, but this is going to happen in the East. This focus on moving German people out east, and particularly the destruction of the Soviet Union as well. Okay, and lastly, a part of Mein Kampf is to blame the loss of the First World War on the Jewish people, and this is illogical. But yet this is going to be part of what they call for. Now, the Nazi Party will be popular in the early 1920s, but as there's recovery in Germany in the mid 1920s, the party almost disappears. But fate, as it turns out, will help the Nazi cause, and part of that is because of the Great Depression. So in a previous activity, you examined and you looked at the various causes of the Great Depression, and then also the conditions of the Great Depression as well. So hopefully you got this particular piece done and completed. But what it does is that it's going to elicit a number of responses by these particular countries. Now, part of your reading looked at Germany as well. And part of how Germany recovers from the Great Depression is a little bit depressing. In that there was massive unemployment in Germany. And as a result of this, many people look to the extreme parties. So in other words, it's not just simply the Nazi Party that starts to grow. It's the Nazis and it is the communists. Both sides of the political spectrum, and both sides not only dislike but realize that their ideologies are completely different from one another. And it's either going to be the communists or the Nazis that win out. And people in the center particularly are going to turn to one or the other as possibly the solution to the problem. But again, there is the big fear all over Europe and all over the world that there would be a communist revolution like the one that took place in Russia. And as it turns out, the center, the moderates of Germany, decide to turn to the Nazis, thinking that perhaps they would find a solution by the Nazis in order to eliminate the communists. And so if you're looking at this particular number right here, so pre-Great Depression, these are the number of seats that the Nazis earned. In other words, compared to the more moderate Social Democrats and the Catholic Center, there's a small party. They're virtually nothing. But with the Great Depression, all of a sudden now, 108 seats. By 1932, 230 seats as such. And the Nazis are actually going bankrupt for how much they are paying for these elections, all of a sudden now are in a slight decline and feel as if they need to take dramatic action. We'll get to the action they take in just one moment. And so with that, the Nazi Party grows through the electoral process. And when all of a sudden the Nazis become the largest party in Germany, Hitler was appointed the chancellor, almost like the chief executive, like a president of sorts here. And with that, he takes that drastic action. And that drastic action occurs because of an action taken by a rogue communist who actually ends up setting fire to the German parliamentary building known as the Reichstag. And in doing so, Hitler uses this excuse to seize power and to basically arrest and murder communists all across the country, using, just like Mussolini does, a secret police. In other words, using violence as a means to eliminate his political rivals, starting with the Communist Party to disband and to eliminate the Communist Party, and then eventually all the others that you saw in that chart there, using mass media in order to control the message, and we'll observe that later on, and therefore to create a society whereby he is in complete control. There are economic policies of change as well. Unions and strikes were banned, again, all to weaken left-leaning political parties and the communists. Many women were forced from their jobs to create this notion of Nazi patriarchy. And as a result of some of the policies, including the creation of major public projects, but more particularly the rearming of war industries, unemployment decreases. And so in a lot of ways, Germany gets out of the Great Depression faster than some of the Western democracies, albeit war and creating military equipment will only benefit you if you actually go to war and start to take from other states. And so Germany, as it turns out, recovers from the Great Depression before Western powers and is able to sustain this because it actually aggressively attacks other countries. And so as a result of this, Germany turns to fascism, their version of fascism, Nazism, in this time period. So the last lecture review question is to explain one cause of fascism in Germany during this time period in the interwar period. So take a moment, go ahead and answer this question. And this is going to lead into one of the key components of how Germany and Italy were able to control their states using this new totalitarian form of government, as we examine some of the propaganda that was utilized during this time period. All right, check that out, and we'll continue this with that activity.